Welcome inside MI6. This iconic building, familiar to movie fans everywhere, is the home of Britain's Foreign Intelligence Service.
In Washington this month, around 130 figures drawn from politics, intelligence, technology, and the defense industry met behind closed doors at the 2026 Bilderberg conference. Amongst them was Britain's intelligence chief, Blaise Metreweli. Her attendance is not unusual in itself. What is unusual is the absence of scrutiny around a gathering where issues of direct public consequence, war, surveillance, financial systems, and emerging technologies are discussed without public record. For British taxpayers and voters, the question is not simply who attends Bilderberg, but what policy direction may be shaped in private. The themes discussed this year were consistent with a decade-long trend: artificial intelligence, defense strategy, digital finance, and geopolitical competition. The convergence of these areas is increasingly evident. Artificial intelligence is no longer treated as a discrete policy area. It now underpins military planning, intelligence gathering, and economic control. Senior figures linked to defense contractors and technology firms have openly argued that future wars will be defined by autonomous systems, particularly drone swarms guided by AI. This closely echoes warnings made by Blaise Metreweli herself in her first public speech in December 2025. She described a world in which the rules of conflict are being rewritten and where technologies such as AI, biotechnology, and quantum computing are reshaping both warfare and power. Her message was explicit. The UK is now operating in a space between peace and war, where cyber attacks, disinformation, and technological competition blur traditional boundaries. That framing matters. It suggests that discussions at gatherings like Bilderberg are not theoretical. They sit within an active strategic doctrine already being articulated by intelligence leadership. At the heart of it all is the growing reach of Palantir Technologies. When a meeting centers on artificial intelligence, defense systems, and digital control, it inevitably centers on the companies already building and running those systems. Palantir's software is now embedded across parts of government and security infrastructure, which makes its presence in these circles less incidental than strategic. Gatherings like Bilderberg offer a setting where such firms can present their tools not just as useful, but as essential. The concern is that what is being normalized in the process are systems that extend surveillance, concentrate power over data, and quietly redefine the balance between state authority and individual rights. In the United States, Palantir is reportedly becoming embedded in core military systems. In the UK, its footprint has widened into sensitive state infrastructure, including the NHS and financial regulatory data. Recent reporting has highlighted concerns among MPs about its access to Financial Conduct Authority information and the broader implications for oversight. The underlying issue is not simply procurement, it is structural. As Blaise Metreweli noted in his speech, power is becoming more diffuse, shifting away from states towards corporations and technological actors. For taxpayers, this raises a practical question. Who ultimately controls the systems that manage public data, security decisions, and risk assessments? If those capabilities sit within private firms, accountability becomes harder to trace. Switzerland's reported refusal to adopt Palantir systems on sovereignty grounds underscores that this is not a settled question amongst Western allies. Another issue likely to have featured prominently is digital identity. The UK government under Keir Starmer has indicated that it will not proceed with the introduction of a national digital ID system. However, critics argue this amounts less to a firm rejection than a deferral, suggesting the policy has been set aside until political conditions make its introduction more viable. The policy is often framed in administrative terms: efficiency, fraud prevention, streamlined services. But the structural implications are more far-reaching. A centralized digital ID system, introduced incrementally through measures such as age verification and online compliance regimes, can become embedded as a prerequisite for participation in everyday life. At that point, identification ceases to be a neutral tool. It becomes infrastructure. And infrastructure, by definition, can be controlled. Access to services, platforms, or financial systems can be granted or withdrawn at scale. The concern raised by critics is not immediate misuse, but latent capability, the ease with which exclusion or sanction could be applied once such a system is in place. For a democratic society, the question is not whether digital ID can be useful. It is whether sufficient safeguards exist once it becomes unavoidable. The presence of NATO figures, including Mark Rutte, and senior military officials such as Marcus Lobenthal, points to continued emphasis on defense integration. Since 2014, analysts have observed a shift in Bilderberg discussions towards a more explicitly militarized outlook. That trajectory reflects broader geopolitical realities: the war in Ukraine, rising tensions in the Indo-Pacific, and increased focus on the Arctic. Metreweli's own remarks reinforce this direction. She described Russia as an aggressive, expansionist threat and warned of tactics operating below the threshold of war: cyber attacks, sabotage, and disinformation campaigns. The implication is that Western policy is increasingly shaped by a permanent state of strategic competition. For taxpayers, that translates into sustained defense spending, expanded intelligence operations, and deeper integration with private sector technology providers. Perhaps the most immediate issue raised by Bilderberg is not any single topic, but the manner in which these discussions occur. When political leaders attend public forums, such as the World Economic Forum, their statements are recorded, scrutinized, and debated. At Bilderberg, by contrast, the same categories of individuals meet under conditions of confidentiality. Organizers argue that this enables candor. Critics argue it removes accountability. What is striking is the limited coverage by mainstream media. Much of what is known about the conference, its participants, themes, and tone emerges from independent journalists operating on the margins of access. The reporting has become, in effect, the primary source of public visibility into an event involving heads of government, intelligence chiefs, and corporate leaders. That reliance raises a basic question. If such meetings are of no consequence, why do they attract such senior figures? And if they are consequential, why is scrutiny so limited? So what was Blaise Metreweli doing at the 2026 Bilderberg meeting? Her own public statements provide part of the answer. She has set out a worldview in which technology, intelligence, and conflict are converging, where power is shifting beyond the state, and where the UK must act decisively with an increasingly contested global environment. Bilderberg brings together precisely those actors shaping that environment: governments, militaries, and the companies building the underlying systems. The unanswered question is not whether such discussions take place. It is whether they should take place without meaningful public scrutiny, and what that means for democratic accountability, public spending, and the preservation of fundamental freedoms in the years ahead.